Good morning. I'm Kara Renee with Greater Portland, Inc. Thank you for joining us for today's Road to Recovery webinar. As part of the series, GPI has been partnering with the local office of global consulting firm Slalom to provide webinars called Leading Through Uncertainty to help companies and communities stay successful working in a changed economy and in a virtual world, which brings us to today's topic, which is virtual facilitation techniques and tools. One key to thriving in the virtual world is strengthening our ability to facilitate meetings in a way that is collaborative, engaging, and productive. So our Slalom experts today will share new tactics to lead and facilitate virtual meetings, how to leverage tools to better engage virtual meeting participants, and some practical knowledge to share with your team members. Please use the chat box to ask questions. They will answer them throughout the presentation, so don't hold back if you have questions. Our presenters today are Reky Martha. Reky is a business advisory consultant who has worked with retail, technology, startup companies, and international organizations. She is focused on organizational effectiveness, process improvement, and strategy, and has significant experience working remotely with people from around the globe. We also have Megan Gallaway. Megan is a solution architect with a track record of turning ideas into realities through change management and implementation planning, process design and improvement, organizational analysis, and expert facilitation. She will share lessons on translating an in-person meeting into a virtual session, which is something we're all having to deal with these days. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Reky and Megan, and thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Kara. Thank you for coming today and taking your time to learn together and share experiences with us. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. Let's take a moment to condition our surrounding, get comfortable, and make sure that our environment is conducive to our learning. We would like this to be an interactive learning, so please do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and our team will help us facilitate and answer your questions, and we'll take moments and ask you questions along the way. Let's do a little check-in. Let's launch the poll. We are curious to know your comfort level in facilitating virtual meetings and the tools that you are using. How comfortable are you leading a virtual meeting? And if you keep scrolling down, ask more questions. What tools are you using to support your virtual meetings currently? And on average, how many meetings did you attend just the past month? For those of you who just joined, let's take a moment and fill in the poll. All right.
So Reky, it's looking like most folks on the call are comfortable facilitating virtual meetings, and we have quite a lot of experience with Zoom, probably a good thing since we're on Zoom right now, in Teams, as well as a little bit with Miro and Mural and Trello, and not surprising that most people attended 20 to 30 meetings on average last month.
Oh, well, thank you for recapping that, Megan, and also thank you for sharing your input. So let's take a look at the average meeting we have monthly in the US. So prior to COVID-19, on average in the US, we have about 11 million meetings. Prior to COVID-19, we have, how many meetings did US employee attend every month? And the answer is about 62 meetings. I am sure some of you can empathize with this. And interestingly, during COVID-19, Doodle tracked 48% increase on virtual group meeting. Can you guess how much virtual only happy hours increase? Almost 300%. And we are making this the new normal. Just until about 2 weeks ago, I had to join a meeting that required me using an online whiteboarding tool. 30 minutes into the meeting, I was still struggling to log in and ended up missing most of the content and discussion. Lucky to be surrounded by fast learner, I am accompanied here with Megan, who mastered the tool in such a short amount of time and bring us along her journey. You must have attended a lot of virtual meetings, attending a lot of articles on how, and finding and reading a lot of articles on how to improve virtual meetings. The intention here is to share our learnings in a hope that today you can add a little bit more knowledge, techniques, tools, and perhaps learning from our past struggles in acclimating to this new normal. And we would love to hear your input as well. Let's be mindful that it is hard to remember content in virtual meetings. Researcher also highlighted that our attention span is getting shorter and shorter in virtual engagement. This is because what we hear virtually is without that second stream of information that our unconscious mind constantly feeds us about intent and emotions. So usually we look at people, we look at their eyes, their facial expression, body language. So that means that our mind are not fully engaged. Also, lack of social cues that indicate when our audience is puzzled or lost or interested or bored, little of that gets through. To overcome this challenge, we can pause and do check-in more often throughout our virtual meetings. Find ways to improve our techniques and tools to better engage. And it is also important to see these exponentially rapid changes as an opportunity to grow. This is how we can get ahead of the game. Imagine the increase of productivity with virtual meetings. We are encouraged to design the meeting to be more precise, invite the right people, and ensure that objectives are achieved. Think about inclusivity. Virtual meeting can be inclusive. Does not matter where the participants are. For some of you who attended inclusion meetings in the past, sometimes it's tricky because people are in far places, but now we can include people who are in a different time zone. Take a look at cost reduction. When we master virtual meetings, facilitation, and conferences, consider how much more reduction on travel costs and travel time or conference booking room. Business without border, and I love this idea. Virtual meetings allow conversation everywhere and a new insight to approach business expansions. So first, let us be more intentional. Decide the meeting that we need to intentionally tailor to meet our needs the best way possible. Consider things that can be delivered via email to minimize virtual meetings amount and fatigue, and invite your participants to attend the right meetings. So we structured today's learning by suggesting all of us to think about type of meetings that we run. And the second, we decide clearly the intention of the meeting, we will be able to start designing the meeting strategically. There are 3 types of meeting that we're gonna present here. First, meeting to brainstorm ideas, and we'll be sharing with you tools and techniques and best practices. Meetings to make decisions. And the third one is meetings to inform and align. So bear in mind, when we go through this presentation, that we're dividing it into these 3 large categories. Megan, what have you been learning so far?
Quite a lot. Some of it has been a little bit painful, but like Reky said, the rest of the presentation is organized into types of meetings. When quarantine started, I had never heard of Miro, and it's kind of unbelievable to realize I had never heard of Zoom either. Now, however many weeks later, I am quite experienced with both of them. Like Reky said, we're going to break the presentation into types of meeting. Before we get into all of the different meeting types and what you have to be aware of when you're planning those meetings, we wanted to share a couple of best practices, some of which we learned the easy way and some of which were learned the hard way. But in a virtual world, when you are planning and putting together a virtual meeting, the key is planning. And one of the best tools to help you do that is a facilitator's agenda. If you Google it, you can find some examples, but think of it as a way to plot out step by step what you're going to do, who's going to do it, how much time you are allocating for that, and any supporting materials that you would need to facilitate that. The second best practice is to learn the tool in advance. So if you are using Miro and you know that that's brand new, for example, to the group that's going to be attending the meeting, you want to make sure that you provide some sort of onboarding or opportunity for the people attending to get familiar with the tool prior to the meeting. With time being short, you want to make sure that that people are not spending time in the meeting learning how to use the tool. One of the things we've developed that has worked quite well, again using Miro as an example, is we sent out training in advance and offered this like onboarding type space so people could come in at their own leisure to practice with the tool and get familiar with it. I mean, not everyone's going to do it, but even if 50% of the attendees take the time to get familiar with the tool prior to the meeting, that's very helpful. The number 3 is keeping it simple. Even thinking back to the survey that we took at the beginning of the session, how many different options were there for types of tools that are out there that all of us are using? And when you're thinking about putting together a session, it can be tempting to use one tool for voting, one tool for sharing your screen, another tool for people dialing in to the conference call. And, while that might work, the more tools you bring into the mix without good reason, the greater the chance for something to go wrong in terms of technology. I mean, I was facilitating like a 30-person session with people all across the globe, and we had tested out the tool in advance, and even then, the voting function didn't work. So we had to quickly pivot and do something else, which leads to number 4, have a backup plan. In a perfect world, you aren't facilitating the meeting on your own, you have a partner. Even if that isn't true, just think about worst case scenario, like say the screen share doesn't work, what's my backup plan? Or if the voting function doesn't work, what can we do then? Inevitably, something unplanned happens, and we're not saying that you can think through all of the worst case scenarios, if you will, but just putting some thought into that can help you adjust faster. And that ties into the last one, which is embrace a learner's mindset. I mean, even though we've been in quarantine for quite a few weeks now, I've actually lost track of how many weeks, we're still learning and adapting. This new normal continues to evolve. And I think as long as we can have patience with each other and patience with ourselves as we're learning and trying new things and create that space to be okay if things don't go as planned, we'll be set up for success.
Thank you, Megan. Megan just highlighted that the best practices involve solid preparation. Meeting to brainstorm ideas can be challenging even in person. So if you remember before lockdown, we usually bring all of the Post-it, the windows and doors are full of Post-it if we're doing brainstorming. Same thing, the preparation is important in the virtual world. The time needed to design a good brainstorming meeting is equal or even more than the meeting time spent. Choosing, preparing, conditioning the tool that is right is also the key to this type of meeting. Right tools can be empowering your meeting participants to explore creativity. However, right tools handled poorly can turn into disaster. And I've experienced this myself. Next, the question you ask participants in virtual meeting, brainstorming meeting, needed to be prepared carefully ahead of time. With the time limitation, shorter attention span, and to keep participants focused on the process, really select your questions. Maybe in our mind we have 10 questions. Maybe we only have 1 or 2 questions to really ask the participants and give enough time for them to provide input. Lastly, it is beneficial to collaborate with your meeting participants to increase engagement and ownership. I would encourage to do not hesitant to ask favor to help you manage the chat group or support running the tools that you are using, and really go wild, let participants share their ideas and push the time limits. So some of the resources that we want to share with you here, and perhaps after this meeting, if you have not yet know about the tools, take a look. There are many tools out there to facilitate brainstorming meetings. There are more and more online whiteboarding tools that you can use as an infinite space to ideate. I think outside of Miro and Miro, there is Prezi in the past, and there's also idea boards, a simpler version of Miro and Mural. Both Miro and Mural are great tools that allow you to mimic Post-it brainstorming activities. Both have great capabilities such as online voting, design thinking templates, and really easy flow creation. Zoom in, zoom out. The lockdown function giving facilitators more power, especially in Miro. Although, you know, sometimes depending on your internet, it could create some glitches, but really, these 2 tools are really empowering your participants to jot down their ideas in the Post-it, change color, you can do color coding, you can do voting. It really a matter of choosing which tool that resonates more with you and your team. And as Megan mentioned earlier, that it's probably good to take time with your team to really learn about the tool itself before the actual brainstorming activity. A quick visual, a screenshot of a mural brainstorming activity could look like this. Miro has a little bit more process oriented. Megan.
Yeah, all right. So what you see here is a screenshot of a Miro board. I've been spending a lot of time in Miro. That being said, the best practices that we're sharing can apply to any suite of tools that you're using. So when you think about brainstorming sessions and what even they look like in person, right? It's people coming together, you spend time kind of diverging as a group and coming up with ideas, coming back together, sharing them, etc. One thing that we found really helpful is this idea of a visible timer. While you were in person, you might have used your phone to set a timer, etc. But there are tools, either like websites, or if you are using Miro or Mural, they have built-in timers, and you can have that up while an activity is taking place. I found that enabling the people in the session to kind of see the clock running down helps keep you on pace. It's very easy to get distracted in a virtual world, and so keeping things time boxed and showing that timer to the attendees helps keep the pace going and ensures that you're flowing through everything. Also, just like in person, sometimes a conversation can take a deep dive. The deep dive may be helpful, or it may be best to kind of put in a parking lot and discuss later in a different forum. With that, there are ways to use virtual tools to have what we call a visible parking lot. Saw a lot of people use Teams here. I know that Microsoft has a whiteboard function within Teams now. I haven't used that a lot, but there are ways to create that sort of parking lot space. And as a facilitator, for example, you can put items in that parking lot so the attendees know that you haven't forgotten about it, you aren't ignoring them, but you can keep the flow going of the session that you've designed. The third one I think is the most illuminating for me, which is this idea of breaking it up into small sessions. So oftentimes brainstorming sessions that I've been a part of can be quite long because you are doing that sort of diverging and converging. And so what might have been a 2 or 4 or even an all-day working session in person, think about breaking that up into small sessions over the course of a couple of days, for example. And also think about, out of those 4 hours together, how much of it needs to be formal time where people are coming together, you know, on a video chat like this versus it can be like informal where people can do kind of homework on their own. When you see the screenshot here, there's that brainstorm activity on the bottom. And so what we did was we took maybe what would have been a 2-hour session, let's say. We had 1 hour of it as a formal coming together meeting similar to this where we're all on Zoom together in Miro. And we went through the content and the instructions and we had a discussion. But then rather than scheduling that second hour where people would do the brainstorm, we had that as homework and informal. So when you think about people being home with childcare and other commitments as well, building in that flexibility into your session can be quite helpful. So the people could then choose what hour they wanted to spend on their own time to do the brainstorming activity. And that worked out quite well. So I kind of just went into number 4, which is mix it up, which is what I was just talking about, the idea that it doesn't all have to be formal together, especially if we are doing that kind of diverging, brainstorming, independent type of activities where we don't have to be on video looking at each other, you know. The last part is providing detailed guidance. You can kind of see it here on the screenshot, that call out like complete this by 2 p.m. Thursday. We talked before about setting up time and training and sharing materials to help people get up to speed with the tool. The other thing to consider is if you are using Miro, or maybe it's like a PowerPoint that you are collaborating on via Teams with other people, wherever you can put instructions into the mechanism that you're using to help people and remind them what you're asking for, like what the assignment is and how they execute it, the more likely you'll get what you need from there. And so with that, I will pause for a second and just see if there are any questions that any of you have around anything we've talked about so far.
Or even if you want to share experience, your past learning with some of these tools.
And I think too, we only have maybe 20 minutes left, is that right? All right, maybe we move on. If you think of one later, you can always ask it. We'll pause again.
Definitely. So the second type of meeting that we will discuss today is the meeting to make decisions. This is the type of meeting that require you to think through who really needs to be in the meeting. And if so, do they understand the objectives of the meeting and have all the information needed to make the decision? If they don't have the information, how do you provide that information prior to the meeting? Do you need to send email prior to the meeting, or do you need to touch base and give them a quick call to get them up to speed? And oftentimes in a complicated project, making a quick phone call and then getting them to understand the objective of the meeting and really, hey, think through this question in the meeting, we're going to do voting, please get your input ready, type of preparation is needed. It is also crucial to think through what might be a roadblock in the decision-making process. The key here is a strong leadership throughout the discussion, but also having an engagement tool that can be powerful. So engagement tools can capture feedbacks and voices that might be missed otherwise, because simply in a virtual meetings, not everyone can unmute and speak up at the same time. With the right tools and strong leadership throughout the discussion, even though a tough decision, I think, can be made smoothly. So the tools that we're sharing here, there are a lot more actually, but we're highlighting Slido and Mentimeter, and I think there is Poll Everywhere, and there are a few other things out there. Even Mural and Miro can be used to carry over that brainstorming or process to voting and actually take decisions. Take a look at these two slides. Slido, it's interesting because you can do word clouding. Sometimes it's really interesting to check in with people, have them look at their phone for a first time in a virtual meeting, asking someone to, hey, take a look at your phone, type in Slido and entering the code number. And there you can ask as simple as, how are you feeling today? And there is a visual where you can get a word cloud, and you can gauge whether people are tired, they're having a Zoom fatigue, and really gauge the feelings there. Mentimeter, it's also a great tool, has limited number of questions that can be posted for the free version, but it can accommodate really well open-ended questions to capture your participants' voices and feedback. So hopefully you can check out some of these tools. And Megan, what were your experiences doing this type of meeting?
Many, but the things that come to mind is trying to, if you're thinking about what could possibly go wrong, when you have a lot of people that you're bringing together and you're hoping to get a decision made, one of the best practices that I've uncovered is really thinking through an experience that guides their thought process. So here you see, again, an example using Miro, but you can do this with whichever suite of tools you are using. Thinking through, okay, if I need to get them to make a decision about funding, for example, well, what are the 3 questions we need to ask ourselves before we can make that decision? So kind of what's that logical flow that we need to think through to make that decision. And here what you see is like each one of those little squares is a question that would build on each other, that would get us to the end there, which is a plan, which was the decision that we needed people to make. So we very carefully created this curated thought process with a tight timeline that walked people through the questions that they would have to answer in order to be able to make that decision. Voting techniques are also quite helpful when you have people that, when there are a lot of options and you have quite a few participants that need to make a decision. As I mentioned before, some of these tools have voting built in. I had an experience where we needed like 30 people to make a decision, and the voting was, it did not work. And so one thing that we did is make it pretty manual. We just dropped a bunch of star shapes into the tool that we were using, and each people took like 3 stars and voted on the thing that they wanted to allocate their vote to. So there are ways to do this in a little bit more manual if you don't have access to some of those swanky tools like Miro. And then some of the same best practices that we talked about before around time boxing the discussion and using the visible parking lot is also helpful. There are all kinds of thinkers in the world too. Some people make decisions quite quickly and with limited amounts of information, and other people really like to think through everything. So as Reky mentioned, just trying to tailor the experience to both of those types of thinkers is very helpful, and means that you are more likely to achieve the outcome that you desire. Okay, pause again. Any questions? Okay, Reky, back to you to take us home with that last meeting type.
Great. So the last one is meetings to inform or align. This meeting really requires you to focus on relationship. Connect before you commence. Take a few minutes to intentionally connect with your team members in the beginning of the meeting. This practice will lead to safe and collaborative culture as trust is strengthened over time. And it's a challenge doing this in virtual world, but it's very much doable. The challenge is to make sure that everyone is following the meetings because it's aligning. So we can utilize some tools to keep the participants engaged. Megan mentioned earlier that people need time to digest information. To provide the right and digestible information, we can consider using tools such as project management tools. Make sure to wrap up the meeting with check-in to see how people are doing. Are they feeling comfortable with the task they are assigned to? Check in if they are feeling informed and empowered, or invite them to have a follow-up conversation if there is any concern or question. This follow-up can be done through one-on-one conversation, or even in a water cooler channel. I find it quite interesting after aligning in a meetings, actually to check people up in the water cooler channel and ask, how are you feeling about that meeting? Is there any question? And just like give a gentle nudge to check in. This is a screenshot of one of my meeting. Recently, candidly, one of my leaders said that he missed seeing everybody's faces and asked us to put on our video. It's early in the morning, people are just getting their coffee, but it just felt really good. Someone wanted to see my face in the morning and we smiled, and I took a screenshot of this, but it's one of a simple way to engage with your participants. There are a few different ways to support, track, or align this type of meeting. There are tools that can be efficiently helping you to assign tasks and checking in progress. What I'm bringing in here is project management tools as Asana and Trello. Quite simple tools, but there are out there's Kanban boards, Jira, or even perhaps Excel sheet or Smartsheet dashboard that can give you a little bit of a good visual and keep your participant engaged. One of my meetings to align is using Jira, and while the meeting is happening, someone is sharing the screen and really checking into what is the progress of the work using that tool. So take a look at some of these tools, explore if this is something that you and your team can use. Trello is designed to track work progress in a Kanban style, so backlog, what's in progress, what's in review, and what's done. So it's pretty straightforward, simple. Asana is designed for a more complex project management to accommodate multiple layers of task assignments. So see and explore what tools would be beneficial for your team. This is an example of Trello. So basically you can move things from one column to the next one. Asana is a bit more complicated with a more rigid timeline. How have you been doing this, Megan?
Many different ways. So in addition to what you shared, Reky, with thinking about an inform or align meeting at a team level where you're aligning on progress and the work that needs to be done. The example that I have here is a little bit higher level. So thinking about project status and how you communicate that to your leaders. Lately I've been working a lot in an agile manner. So we call that same status, review a project demo. And what you see here is an example of how we created that presentation, if you will, or that inform or align meeting. In this particular example, I think we had 3 or 4 project sponsors that we wanted to update on our project or demo our progress, and calendars were a little crazy, and that meant that we couldn't find one time for everyone to join. And so what we did was we provided our content in a Miro board, as you see here. Again, I think you could do it in a PowerPoint presentation, and we found a time where most of the people could attend, although not all of them. And some of the best practices here are to leave space in that agenda for people to ask questions when you're sharing content with them. You've seen us try to do that here in this session as well. The second one is providing access to content. So again, in a world where we maybe have more meetings than we would like, and it's really hard to find a time that works for a large group of people, if you create the content that you plan to share and put it in a place where people can access it before the meeting, during the meeting, or after the meeting, that can be really helpful, especially if you're trying to foster alignment with a large group of people or just share updated information with a large group of people. Related to that is this idea of sharing key points. It's kind of hard to see here, but below each of those frames, which is Miro's word for a slide, we actually have the key takeaway for each thing that, each slide that we were communicating. And that's something, for example, that you could put in a PowerPoint presentation. So say that you were trying to share a project update with a large group of people, and you knew that some people would have to go in after the meeting and read the deck or the PDF, etc. Think about putting in your one sentence summary or the key point or takeaway from that slide. And that means that people can come in on their own time outside of the meeting and get a sense of what was communicated there. The last one, or sorry, number 4 is the idea of breaking it up. Before we talked about breaking up large sessions into smaller, shorter meetings, what we mean when we say break it up here is in a world where it's maybe harder to pay attention than if you're in person, finding a way to break up your content into a way that's easier for people to consume it in that moment is very helpful. If you look at the example here, you'll see we kind of broke things out into chapters or sections. And so that helped us, number 1, orient the audience at the beginning with all of the things we were going to talk about. And then number 2, it helped break up this kind of dense content into more manageable, consumable pieces. And so again, that's something that you could do in PowerPoint or in any other tool really that you're trying to present information. Don't just present all of it at once. Try to find a way to organize it into buckets that will make it more digestible. And the last thing is, as much as possible, try to find a way to make it interactive. Again, this example here was a little bit of a demo, which was mostly us providing information and asking questions. But at the end, we did a little bit of a retro. In this session that we had today, you saw we did a poll at the beginning. So how can you compete for people's attention if they're sitting, at their computer virtually with maybe their phone by them, etc.? And the answer is complicated, but finding ways to engage with the audience where you're asking them to do things is a good way to help keep that attention throughout your meeting, especially if it's a little bit longer session. All right, with that, I will pause again, and we're nearing the end of our presentation. Are there any questions that folks have around what we talked here, or perhaps something that we didn't talk about here but related to virtual facilitation?
Yeah, or best practices that you have uncovered in the past. And feel free to also maybe unmute yourself and share the questions if you want to speak rather than putting it in the chat.
Great. Well, I mean, I think one of the silver linings in the world that we're in right now is that it is creating space where we kind of have to go out and explore all the tools that are out there and find what works for us. And it's kind of amazing at all of the things that are out there that can help us have maybe even more efficient sessions or effective sessions than we typically would have in person. So.
Yeah, and before you're taking it into professional setting, some of these tools can be used also for personal stuff. So maybe explore, log in, play around a little bit, ask your family a question using Slido or Mentimeter so that they can vote what's the next holiday spot, for example. Yeah, explore that.
Also, we have a question from Stacy. That's a great question around alignment meetings, and she said that she's found that she needs to call on each person by name, or she doesn't have a way to make sure that they are truly engaged. That's a really great point. I have had similar experiences, and I've learned about some fun tools that can facilitate that. Two that come to mind is this concept of like a jar of names, if you will. So you can create like a slide, or again in Miro, have like a jar, have everyone's name in there, kind of too small for you to know what you're picking in advance, and you just kind of like draw a name out and pick it. There's also this tool that's free online called like Wheel of Names. So it's kind of like Wheel of Fortune, but you put everyone's name on it and it will spin and land on someone's name, so you can call on their name that way too. And I think a third option is if you know some people aren't going to engage, you can kind of chat with someone else attending the meeting in advance and kind of ask them to help you call on their peers or ask for their input, etc. Reky, have you found any other useful practices with kind of calling on some of the quieter people?
Yeah, it's a fine balance as well. I think people like it when they are, their name is called, but it depends on your project, and sometimes there are introvert people who are more, comfortable working behind the scene and leaving the options for them to call their names, but also share their input through a chat group instead of speaking. Or what neat about Zoom is you can send a private message. So if you notice amongst your 10 people in the meeting, 9 are engaged and 1 is super quiet, instead of chatting it to the whole group, do a private chat with that person. Hey, just checking in. Are you feeling okay? Is there any input? So really reading that environment, using the tools that Megan was suggesting, or using the chat tool that we already have in Zoom to check in on those people. Also, I think in the past, we touched base with the participants and really asked them, hey, please help us, ask good questions so it intrigues other people to share their opinions. Again, engaging with the participants before the meeting also is a good practice.
Yeah, and I would say last, maybe do a retro or do some sort of session. If people aren't engaged, maybe there's a way to change the way in which you are setting up that meeting to better facilitate engagement. Looks like we are a little bit over time, so perhaps Kara, we turn it back over to you.
Thank you both. Yeah, we're starting to run short on time here. I just want to say thank you to Reky and Megan for all this amazing information. Clearly something we can all use right now. I just want to remind everybody that this session has been recorded, as all Road to Recovery webinars are. So if you have colleagues who can benefit from this information, please share the link when it goes out in the GPI investor newsletter. And we also share the link in every webinar invitation. Give us a few days to put this one up, but it will be available. So please share it, because not everybody can join us live and they can still use the information. I want to say we're also very excited about next week's Road to Recovery webinar, The Future of Healthcare. We're going to take a look at how the COVID crisis will impact healthcare. The webinar is next Tuesday, August 11th at 10:30 a.m., a little earlier than normal. And we're going to share the thought leadership of Mark Gans, CEO of Cambia Health Solutions, Trent Green, COO of Legacy Health, and Luis Machuca, CEO of Enly Health Intelligence. So lots of expertise to be talking about what we should be expecting going forward in healthcare. We hope you can join us for that one. And that's all I have. So other than say thank you again for joining us. Thank you to Slalom for partnering with us, and we will see you all soon.